welcome to another episode of Behind the Bill, where we discuss with opinion leaders, policymakers, some of the hottest topics driving Sacramento policymaking. Today's particularly exciting. First guest with a legislator. We've got some great questions for you coming up.
Awesome.
We'll have you introduce yourself in just a second. But first, I want to run by who's sitting around the table. We're going to begin with Kim Craig, policy advocate, legislative expert extraordinaire.
Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
Most recently from Governor Brown's legislative office, kind of running herd for the governor at the time. Mm-hmm. Now with ARC Strategies. Yep. Sorry about the demotion, but I'm sure you're going to bounce.
In life.
Yeah, you'll come back.
We go up, we go down.
Amy Brown, who I think a few people know, not only in town, but a lobbyist here in town. One of the founding partners of ARC Strategies, was somehow able to cajole Kim into coming from the governor's office to work with you.
I lied.
We'll get into that a little bit later. And, of course, our resident international rugby star, Colin Hawley. Policy experts, too, by the way, and a couple land use decisions we're going to be jumping into. And our first guest here on Behind the Bill, State Senator Scott Wiener, from the city of Sacramento, San Francisco. Yeah, didn't mean to offend. Entirely, though, right? You're entirely within the city.
No, I'm part of San Mateo County, too.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, multi-county.
So let's talk about what got you into public office in the first place, because you were a member, you were Board of Supervisors. You were on the County Board of Supervisors, city, county in San Francisco. Yeah. Can you tell us about what compelled you to run for office there, and then maybe why you decided to come to this beautiful city?
Sure. Well, I've lived in San Francisco for 22 years, and just, got very involved in the LGBT community and neighborhood work, and I don't know, over time it just sort of made sense to run for office. So.
That was your first run, County Board of Supervisors?
No, actually in 2004 I ran for the Democratic County Central Committee in San Francisco.
That's not a real office, though.
Well, but in San Francisco, it's super intense. There were 56 people running for 12 spots.
Oh.
And on election night, I was in 12th place, 135 votes ahead of 13th place.
Wow.
So I learned early on how to run a close race.
All right, every vote matters.
Every vote matters.
And so what issues did you champion there on the board?
Well, on the Board of Supervisors, when I was elected in 2010, I did a lot of work around housing, which it's always been a big issue in San Francisco, but in the last 10 years has been sort of at a crisis level. A lot of work around HIV prevention, services, funding, work around my most infamous situation was with the Naked Guys. And,
Naked Guys legislation. We'll get to that too.
The Naked Guys legislation. That was a fun one. That was not fun, actually.
It was not?
No, that was not why I ran for office.
It sounds a little not fun.
Yeah, it was not fun.
All right.
Didn't they want to be naked in restaurants and sit in chairs?
Well, we've always had naked people in San Francisco, and it's been cool. Like, no one cares. But right around the time that I took office, they waited for me, basically. I took office, and they, in the Castro, they started, became more common, and they were hanging out at Castro Market like every day, driving in from other parts of the Bay Area, leaving their clothes in their car and hanging out, going into restaurants. And
wait, they would drive clothed and then get naked?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Not all of them, but
Makes
some
sense.
of them.
Well, the leather seats in summer, I get it.
All right.
And people thought it was like cute and funny at first, and then people got annoyed, and we eventually had to take action, but it was one of those things.
And that's what catalyzed you in San Francisco to run for the state senate.
Yes, it was exactly that.
Right.
It was exactly that. Launched me on the higher office.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah. So honestly now, have you envisioned yourself being governor of California? Because I know you all have.
No.
Be transparent, be honest.
No.
Well, you got the name ID.
Are you declaring now that you will never run for governor of California?
I do not want to be governor of California.
Right.
That's a hard job. Yeah. Right, Kim?
It's a very hard job. I would agree.
Yeah.
Speaking of hard jobs, we're going to talk about SB 50, which is probably the biggest bill of the session, dealing with housing. Huge issue in California. You've been tackling this issue since you were on the Board of Supervisors, as you just mentioned. But you've taken a very big, comprehensive, and I would argue unique approach. First things first, is this the first podcast you've talked about SB 50 on?
Sorry, no.
Oh my God, it's not even an exclusive. But it's going to be the best one.
I'm sure it will.
Probably.
So we're going to talk a little bit about SB 50. Can you tell us about the context of that bill and what you were trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, the context is that there's not enough housing, and people can't afford to live here, and We saw in LA, 16,000 people are living in their cars, and that's an undercount. We've created this situation where we basically said it's not important to have enough housing, and if that means that people are getting pushed out and kids can't live where they grew up, can't come back home, and families have to, commute 2 hours each way, that, it's like that's okay, and it's not okay. It's a real crisis for the state, and we have to do something about it. And the legislature and the state government, we've failed. We've miserably failed, and we have to do things differently.
I agree that you failed on a lot of fronts, by the way, not just this bill, but we'll get to that too. What I do want to do is talk about what the bill does.
The bill hasn't failed. The bill is alive and well.
It's alive and kicking.
It got delayed.
It's a little sleep.
Just had
a little dirt nap.
Had a detour.
Yeah, I get it.
Dirt nap.
I get it.
No, the bill said, we have a 3.5 million home deficit, and if we're going to add 3.5 million homes, we don't want to continue to build sprawl and cover up farmland and ruin the environment with more emissions. So the bill says that we should be focusing that housing near where the jobs are and where the public transportation is. And right now in California, cities have routinely, with cities like whether it's a Palo Alto or Cupertino or San Francisco, with lots of jobs, with lots of public transportation access, have said we're banning apartment buildings. That the only thing you're allowed to build is a single family home. So you might have a quarter acre lot, and you're only allowed to build 1 unit of housing on that lot, and it's illegal to build anything else. And so that really guarantees that we're going to have a shortage.
Right.
So this will override that restrictive zoning and say cities have to allow these small to mid-size apartment buildings near transit and jobs.
So, Senator, our firm, as you know, represents a handful of cities who expressed concern about SB 50, and sort of looking at it from a larger perspective, you had a lot of opposition from cities throughout California. What was the premise of their opposition? Was it simply local control? Was it the NIMBY issue? I mean, what constituted them coming out and opposing the bill?
Well, it's a combination. First of all, we had a huge coalition behind the bill. Excuse me. We had...
Behind the bill, did you hear that?
Yep.
Tagline. Thanks for that.
Exactly. I gotcha. We had broad support from labor, from affordable housing organizations, environmental groups, AARP, Habitat for Humanity, UC Student Association. So a lot of groups that really understand the need for more housing. There was opposition from cities, not all cities. Most cities did not oppose the bill. It was, a minority of cities that came out against it. And listen, I'm a former local elected official. I understand the challenges of local government, and we make life hard for local government in terms of even funding their basic services. But this is a situation where we've allowed cities to do whatever they want for housing, to ban apartment buildings, to not allow low-income housing, to stop all housing and make it take 10 years to approve housing. And it hasn't worked. It's driven the car into the ditch. And so local control is usually the right approach, but it hasn't worked here. And so I respect the opposition of the cities, but I just strongly disagree. And their pushback was, yes, just local control, but local control isn't biblical. Local control is good when it delivers good results, which it hasn't here. And then there is the NIMBYism, and there are, I think, city council members, excuse me, get a lot of pressure from NIMBYs in their cities. That who show up at City Hall screaming about any kind of new development. So it was a combination of factors.
Taking a holistic view of this crisis, because it is a crisis. You have kids, community college kids, sleeping in their cars, and trying to fix that problem. With the campfires up north, there was a streamlining of Sequa, kind of get in there to kind of build some housing. And I know we do it for some stadiums, some different special projects. What about Sequa is working? Because I know from the developer community, it's a struggle to get through that process, get through the design review, and actually create an affordable product coming from that 18-month kind of design review, and maybe the risk is there, maybe it's not, to actually do this project, and that becomes something of, even if you create this housing, is it affordable for folks? Is the rent going to be affordable for the quality of life to increase? I just, from your opinion, what's working with Sequa? Where is some room for improvement around that? Because I think California does an amazing job building environmentally friendly buildings. I think there's some aspects of it that could be streamlined, dialed back, so we can actually create a product that is affordable for folks to kind of get in there and.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to do in Sequa, frankly, and you know, and I authored a bill in 2017. Kim was very helpful in helping us get across the finish line. SB 35 that streamlines housing, not in communities that are not meeting their housing goals, and that means no Sequa. But there's a lot more work to do in terms of streamlining. And there are some bills in the legislature this year that increase streamlining, but Sequa should not be impeding particularly infill housing. And it's used that way, and I would love to see us move away from that. It's complicated because of some of the labor issues, and so there's been a negotiation between labor and the building industry this year to create a new kind of structure, which would open the door, I believe, for significant Sequa reform. That has stalled out, and I'm hoping that they'll start the negotiations again and get it done.
So one of the concerns that I've heard through this discussion is that, you know, you possibly reform Sequa to speed up the process. You put a number of new requirements on local governments to build quicker or to provide the planning through their RENA requirements. And then there's no market in terms of the builders and, you know, the real estate industry to go in and actually build. Right,
Well,
so there's a
yeah.
little bit. You can do everything that's right, say under the guise of SB 50, but then how do we actually get these guys to
Right.
come and build?
Well, there are two parts. There's the cities, with help from the state, need to create the space to build the housing, to legalize it through zoning, streamlining, and so forth. So that's step one. But yes, you have to actually have the construction. And construction costs have gone through the roof. It's a combination of things. There's a massive labor shortage in the construction industry, which has been made much worse by the administration's anti-immigrant policy, because the construction workforce has historically been fueled by immigration. And you can come and immigrate to this country and get a really good job to be able to move into the middle class as a construction worker, and our current immigration policy undermines the construction industry. Materials have gone up, and the tariffs have made that even worse, and so it's not a great environment right now in terms of construction costs. But but cities sometimes make it worse by putting huge impact fees that dramatically drive up the cost. And I'm not opposed to impact fees. I authored a transportation impact fee in San Francisco. Impact fees are fine within reason, but cities, and again, I don't want to demonize cities, because of Prop 13 and other constraints we make it really hard for cities to raise the money they need, and so they turn to impact fees, but that makes housing more expensive. And so I know there's work happening this year to potentially take a look at our impact fee structure. There's a study that'll be coming out any time now, but it's an issue we have to grapple with.
So let me one last question on SB 50, because I do hear a lot of stick coming out of Sacramento. I don't see a whole lot of carrot coming out, and I think I would push back a little bit on the notion that, you know, Sacramento hasn't created a big part of the housing problem. And I want to refer to Governor Jerry Brown's elimination of $1 billion annually, $1 billion a year for affordable housing through redevelopment funding, which was really the only carrot, or certainly the largest carrot, to incentivize housing. And after 10 years of a multiplier, you can see a direct correlation between women and children living in cars and the elimination of redevelopment. And I'm not saying that's the only cause, but $10 billion compounded has a big, big impact.
Well,
What are the
yeah.
chances that we can muster up the political will to give local governments tax increment financing again, or is the interest in Sacramento too entrenched?
Yeah, so first of all, there are plenty of carrots. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we have dedicated significant amount of money to supporting local affordable housing programs, whether it's the permanent source that Senator Atkins authored, or the 2 different bonds that we put on the ballot that the voters passed, or the money that is in the budget this year, huge amount of money for affordable housing, supportive housing. I support bringing back a form of redevelopment, and I think, I don't know where the governor stands on that, but I think there is a significant amount of support in the legislature for that. But let's also be clear. That money was not just going to affordable housing. There were
$1 billion a year was.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there were problems with redevelopment, and I would have preferred that we would have reformed it rather than just throw it away, but that's what happened. So yes, let's bring back redevelopment, but let's not kid ourselves and by saying that, or convince ourselves that redevelopment is going to solve the housing crisis, even for low-income people. And I think sometimes the cities say, just give us redevelopment back and it's all good. We don't have to fix the zoning. We don't have to move things along faster. We don't have to have more housing overall. It's both.
Absolutely. And both is important because it does need to be part of the solution. Amy, you had some other questions on some other legislation.
I'm hungry. I'm sorry. I need a snack.
Fine.
No, we do have to have a holistic
I'm hungry. You
approach.
guys want a wiener? Here, take one.
I don't eat wieners.
It's 9:30 in the
I don't eat
morning.
wieners in the morning.
I'm in.
I do.
I'm in.
I'm going to pass. I think it's a hard pass.
I haven't had a
I
wiener in
think-
a long time.
This is
Pretty good.
fantastic.
They're really good.
Wieners in the morning.
Are they at least high
Fantastic.
quality?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Like kosher?
No.
No.
Like Hebrew National kind of
No.
high quality?
Hebrew National.
So, I know that housing is top of one of your highest priorities, but you do have some other bills.
I do.
Mm-hmm. I'd like you to briefly.
Sex-related bills.
I know, a lot of them, by the way.
When you're from San Francisco, that's what you
Frisco.
do. You do sex-related
The
bills.
naked people got
Naked
him
guy
going,
launched his
so
career.
Right,
Right.
that's the beginning of it.
Talk to us about some
There's
of
been
those,
debate
Senator.
breakers.
Well, yeah, talk to us about, like, because I have some technical questions about one of them in particular.
Okay.
SB 145. What does that bill do?
Sure. SB 145 is about the sex offender registry, and people sometimes don't like to talk about the sex offender registry because obviously there are some really bad people who do horrible things to other people and are predators. And we actually, California, 2 years ago, I authored legislation, and thanks to huge assist from Governor Brown, we were able to pass it. It used to be in California that every single sex offender, whether you were a sexually violent predator or whether you were arrested for having sex in the park in 1950, you were on for the rest of your life. There was no way to get off.
Yeah.
So 1 in 400 Californians is currently on sex offender registry, and it's useless for law enforcement because they can't tell who's a risk and who's not a risk, because all these senior citizens who had sex 50 years ago outside and got arrested.
It was the 60s.
Yeah. Exactly. So we fixed that by saying not everyone has to stay on for life, only the really bad ones. But now we have a problem where when the registry was created in the 40s, there was only one form of intercourse that was legal, and that was good old missionary style,
Vaginal.
vaginal sex, vaginal penile sex,
Right.
technically.
Yeah, right.
Any other kind
Is
of
missionary actually in the code?
I don't think it says that. But every other kind of
Bland.
every other kind of intercourse was illegal, and so that was all legalized in the 70s by Willie Brown when he was in the assembly.
Good old Willie.
But the registry right now, if you are like in a Romeo and Juliet situation, let's say 18, 19-year-old having sex with their 17-year-old boyfriend or girlfriend, if it's vaginal intercourse, then the judge doesn't have to put you on the sex offender registry, even though it's technically statutory rape. If it is any other kind of intercourse, you have to go on the registry. And so that means that LGBT young people are getting forced onto the registry. And it also just creates this bizarre situation where if that 18-year-old has sex with his 17-year-old girlfriend, vaginal sex, doesn't have to go on. But if she performs oral sex on him, he must go onto the registry.
Interesting.
So it's a pretty
That's a
irrational
slippery
system.
slope right
And it's
there.
really
Yeah.
fun. I have to say, it's really fun to, like, in legislative hearings and on the floor of the Senate to use all those terms.
Who's squirming?
That's
Yeah.
when I
Who's
tune
squirming?
in.
I
That's
actually-
the
I
best.
used to-
I know. I'm like, the bill's
I
up.
said-
Let's
I'm
watch.
like, oh, he's talking about SB 50.
I said,
oh, we're talking about SB 150.
no, I said, quote unquote, anal sex on the floor of the Senate.
Yes.
Ooh,
Was
mic
that a
drop.
first?
Mic drop.
Wow, that might have been a
I
first.
actually, I was asking around if that was a first, and people thought that maybe in the 70s when they were repealing.
Did you ask
the-
Senator Nielsen? Because he's been around a long time.
Or Alex Vassar, right?
Alex
Vassar.
Vassar's the one you should ask.
Ask
He'll let
Alex
you
Vassar.
know.
Okay, so back to the bill.
Yeah.
Are there certain movements that are covered? Like, I don't know, the San Francisco steam train? or like a Blumpkin?
I don't
You know
know
what
I don't know what a blumpkin
You
is,
can
so
look
I
it
can't.
up
I have to
after
look
that.
it up to tell you if it's included.
Well, yeah. Or
I can Google that,
How
right?
about like a Dirty Sanchez?
I think a Dirty Sanchez would get you on the sex offender registry.
Yeah, it would.
It would.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know that so
Yeah.
clearly?
Yeah,
not-
what how do
do you
you
know?
know that?
I have no idea.
Just sounds
Is that
like
true,
it.
though?
But the
True.
Cleveland steamer would not.
What's the Cleveland steamer?
That's
I'll tell you afterwards.
That's a legislative bingo term that he's going to have to use at this session. We've got to hear that.
Wow, okay. Learn something new every day.
Yeah.
You seem to have cornered the market on these types of bills, Senator.
I do a lot of them.
Anything else that you're planning on introducing that you want to break some news on here?
They're all out there. They're all out there already, and we're doing our sex worker bill to make sure sex workers are safe.
What does that do?
Well, sex workers are they a lot of times don't report violent crime because they think they're going to get arrested for
Yeah.
sex work. And so the bill says that if a sex worker is reporting, a rape, kidnapping, robbery, etc., they can't be arrested for sex work or related offenses like drug possession, to give them an incentive to come make them feel safe to report. And then it also provides that that condoms are not evidence of sex work. There are jurisdictions, including San Francisco until about 10 years ago, where the cops would say, well, you have 5 condoms on you, so that's probable cause to arrest you for sex work. And so it gives an incentive not to carry condoms, which is not the message we want.
Does that include ribbed?
It actually does include ribs. And
How about flavored?
We're thinking about making an amendment to the bill to specifically call out ribbed and flavored.
How about
So-
anal beads?
I don't think anal beads will be covered, but we can take a look at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should sex work be legal?
I think it should be decriminalized.
Okay.
Yeah. I think sex work is, they say it's the oldest profession,
Right.
and there are, a lot of people who this is how they survive, and we need to make it safe for people and not criminalize.
Is that in
people.
the works maybe to?
There's always been talk about it. A bill was just introduced in New York State to decriminalize sex work. There's conversations about California. It's a really, really hard bill, and it also you have opposition. Opposition, of course, from law enforcement and from people who are more on the conservative side. But then you also have to grapple with the issues of making sure that how it interacts with human trafficking. And there's some people who will come forward and say, we're not looking to arrest sex workers, but we want to make sure that we can avoid human trafficking. And so it's a complicated issue, but I'm hopeful that we'll move in that direction.
Final thoughts.
I think I'm just excited about where SB 50 is going to head, and I think, we'll be able to see if you can pull a rabbit out of your hat and figure out what that right
Well,
mix
if
is.
anyone can, it's this guy.
I always call her up and I'm like, I need advice, having nothing to do with
Well,
it.
maybe a different
Having
path
nothing-
is not to call her
Yeah.
anymore.
When you're calling Amy Brown
Well,
for
you're-
advice, you need
you're-
to kind of
you're-
reel it back
you're-
in.
yeah.
But having nothing to do with any of her clients, I just call
Yeah,
her up.
right.
Yeah,
and
no, it's
she
yeah.
tells me
he's-
at the gym what to do too.
No,
bottom
I'm
of the,
shocked.
yeah, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel. You're desperate when you're calling me.
With that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this session of Behind the Bill. Thank you very much, Senator
you.
Wiener, for being
Thank
with
you.
us today.
Thank
Yes.
you.
You can
Thank you
take
very
some of
much.
these with you if you'd like,
I'll
or
bring it
Amy.
from my
Take
office.
I haven't had a hot
Back to
dog
the
in
office.
years.
Amy will finish
This
it.
is so good.
Delicious.
I'm sure you're tired of it.